Hey, before you scroll past this, give me 30 seconds. Because there's a real chance that what you're feeling right now, that strange, persistent, almost impossible to explain sense of not quite fitting anywhere, is not a flaw. It's not a malfunction. It might actually be the most significant thing about you. And by the end of this video, I think you're going to understand exactly why. My name is George, and welcome back to the channel. Before we get into this, real quick, if this content has ever landed somewhere deep for you, consider supporting the channel. There's a link below. A small contribution goes a long way in keeping this work going and helping it reach people who genuinely need it. I appreciate every single person who's shown up here. It means more than you know. Now, let's get into it. I want to start with something that I'm pretty sure happened to you recently. Maybe this week, maybe even today, you were in a room. Could have been a family dinner, a work meeting, a social event surrounded by people who, by all appearances, seemed completely comfortable with where they were in life, what they were doing, who they were becoming. And you sat there, or stood there, and something inside you just went still. Not in a peaceful way, in a strange, disorienting way. Like you were watching everything from one step outside of your own life. Like a camera operator who accidentally walked into their own shot. You weren't angry. You weren't being arrogant. You just felt off, displaced. Like the frequency you operate on is just slightly different from everyone else in the room. And no matter how hard you try to tune yourself to match, something in you refuses to fully go along with it. And then comes the voice. The one that's been following you around longer than you'd like to admit. What is wrong with me? I need you to hear what I'm about to say. Not just process it intellectually. Actually let it land. Nothing. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. That feeling of not belonging in certain rooms, certain conversations, certain seasons of life. It is not a defect in your wiring. It is not anxiety, though it might feel like it sometimes. It is not pride, though the enemy will try to convince you it is. It is discernment. It is your spirit recognizing, at a level that operates below conscious thought, that particular environment was never architecturally designed to contain what is growing inside you. The rooms that couldn't hold you were not rejections, they were redirections. And I know how that sounds. I know it can feel like a cliché, like something you'd see printed on a coffee mug. But I want to show you, specifically, step by step, why that is not just a comforting idea. It is a structural, spiritual reality. And understanding it changes everything about how you interpret your own story. Jeremiah 1:5. Most people have heard this verse, but I want you to actually stop and sit inside it for a moment, because I think we blow past it too fast. God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Before. That word is doing enormous work in that sentence. Before you made a single decision, before you had a track record of any kind, before your first success, your first failure, your first moment of courage or cowardice, before any of the things that you've spent years allowing to define your sense of self-worth, God had already looked across every soul that would ever live on this earth, all 8.2 billion of us alive right now, and every person before and after, and made a specific, intentional, irrevocable declaration about you. Not that one. That one. That one is mine in a different way. Now think about what that actually means for a second. If the decision about your designation was made before you existed, before you had a past, then nothing in your past has the legal authority to overturn it. The enemy cannot use your history to appeal a verdict that was written before your history began. He can try. He does try. Every single day he tries. He takes every room that excluded you, every relationship that ended in disappointment, every person who looked at you like you were too intense, too sensitive, too much, or somehow not enough. And he carefully arranges all of that into what feels like an airtight case. Evidence. Proof that you were wrong to believe there was something special inside you. Proof that the quiet voice telling you that you were made for something more is just ego, just delusion, just a coping mechanism for a person who never quite figured out how to fit in. But here's the thing about a verdict written in eternity. It cannot be appealed with temporal evidence. Your past is real. Your pain is real. But neither of them outranks what was decided about you before either of them existed. I want to tell you about Elijah. And I want to tell you the part of the story that tends to get skipped over because it makes people uncomfortable, because it's too human, too relatable, and it doesn't fit neatly into the version of faith we're usually taught to perform. Elijah was one of the most dramatically anointed figures in the entire Old Testament. This is the man who stood alone on Mount Carmel in front of 450 prophets of Baal, and called fire down from heaven in front of a massive crowd. A public, undeniable, jaw-dropping display of divine power. Right after that, he prayed and ended a multi-year drought. And then, almost unbelievably, he outran a king's chariot on foot for 17 miles. By any possible measure, this was a man operating at the absolute peak of his calling. And then, almost immediately after all of that, he ran into the desert, collapsed under a small broom tree, and asked God to let him die. His exact words, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me." Read that slowly. This is not a man in rebellion against God. This is not someone who lost his faith. This is a designated, consecrated, deeply anointed man, at the absolute end of his emotional and physical and spiritual rope. Convinced he was alone. Convinced the fight was no longer worth it. Convinced that somehow, despite everything he'd just witnessed and participated in, he had ended up on the losing side of history. And what was God's response to this? What did the Almighty do when one of his most chosen vessels hit total rock bottom? He didn't rebuke him. He didn't give him a lecture on faith. He didn't send a thunderclap or a burning bush or a dramatic supernatural intervention. He let him sleep. He sent an angel to bring him bread and water. Not once, twice. He tended to the most basic, most human, most ordinary needs first. Food, water, rest. And only after Elijah had been physically restored, only after his body had what it needed, did God speak to him. And when he did, it wasn't in the earthquake. It wasn't in the raging wind. It wasn't in the consuming fire. It was in a still, small voice, a whisper so quiet that you'd miss it completely if you were still running. Rest first, then revelation. That sequence is not accidental. It is a pattern. And it is a pattern that applies directly to your life right now. How many of you are carrying a weight that nobody around you can actually see? How many of you are exhausted from a battle that exists in a dimension that the people closest to you simply don't have access to? How many of you have quietly, privately, in the dark hours of the night, thought something uncomfortably similar to what Elijah said under that tree? I've had enough. I'm the only one left. Is this even worth it anymore? If that's you, God's first response is not condemnation. It's not disappointment. It is the same thing he offered Elijah: rest, nourishment, and the gentle, patient presence of someone who is not going anywhere. Because Elijah still had work to do. God didn't retire him, didn't replace him. Didn't look at that moment of total collapse and decide he'd made a mistake choosing this particular man. He redirected him, gave him provision for the journey ahead and a new assignment waiting on the other side of the rest. Your exhaustion is not the end of your calling. It is a chapter break. And what comes after the rest is the part that rewrites everything. I want to challenge something that is deeply embedded in both spiritual culture and general self-help culture in America, because I think it has caused an enormous amount of unnecessary anxiety for people who are genuinely seeking. The idea that you need to find your purpose, that it's out there somewhere, a hidden treasure, a cosmic answer buried in the right book, the right mentor, the right experience, the right season of fasting and prayer, that if you just search hard enough, long enough, sincerely enough, eventually you'll stumble across it. Here's the problem with that framework. It positions you as someone chasing something that is perpetually just out of reach. And the longer you chase without catching, the more you start to wonder whether the thing you're chasing actually exists, or whether everyone else found theirs and you're the one person on Earth who somehow got skipped. Here's what I believe is actually true. Purpose is not found. It is revealed. And there is a profound, life-altering difference between those two words. Finding implies the thing is lost. Revelation implies the thing was always there, and the variable isn't the purpose, it's your readiness to carry it. Joseph is the clearest example of this I know. His is one of the most detailed narratives of purpose in all of Scripture, and the thing that strikes me every time I revisit it is this. At no point during his suffering did he find his purpose. Not in the pit his brothers threw him into, not in Potiphar's house, not in the prison where he sat for years for something he didn't do. His purpose was revealed. At the exact moment, the most powerful nation on earth desperately needed something that had been quietly forming inside one man in a forgotten cell. And here's the question worth asking. What was actually happening during all those years of apparent delay and suffering and injustice? What was the pit doing? What was the prison doing? It was forming the person who would be capable of carrying what was about to be placed on his shoulders. The pit stripped him of his outward symbols, the coat, the favoritism, the safety of his father's house. But it couldn't strip the character that God was building inside him. The prison confined his body. It refined his spirit. It sharpened his gifts. It cultivated in him the kind of unshakable trust that can only be developed when you have absolutely nothing else to hold on to. And when the moment came, when Pharaoh had a dream that none of his advisors could interpret, and the entire kingdom was desperate for someone with a specific gift, the person who had been shaped in the silence was precisely the right person for exactly that moment. That is not coincidence. That is divine architecture. Your waiting season is not evidence that God forgot about you. It is the environment in which the person who will carry your purpose is being formed. The depth of what's being built in you right now is directly proportional to the weight of what you are about to be trusted with. Now I want to get into something that requires real honesty, because this is the part of the conversation that most people skip. And it's the part that actually produces change. There's a cycle in your life that keeps showing up. Different faces, different circumstances, different seasons, but the same essential pattern, the same underlying wound, the same outcome. You've noticed it. You've prayed over it. You've declared scripture over it, fasted over it, confessed it, rebuked it, surrendered it. And it comes back. Here is the truth. Every cycle that repeats is attached to an internal agreement that has not yet been broken. This is not about a curse. It is not mystical in the theatrical sense. It is something far more personal and far more actionable than that. It is a belief formed in a genuine moment of real pain that has been running silently in the background of your decisions ever since. Like software installed during a crisis that nobody ever updated. You're not even aware it's running most of the time. But it is shaping what you reach for, what you allow yourself to receive, what you expect, and what you unconsciously confirm. Here's how the agreement gets formed. When you experienced real rejection, the kind that cut somewhere deep, you didn't just feel the pain. In that vulnerable, unguarded moment, you drew a conclusion about your worth, about your desirability, about whether you were the kind of person who gets chosen, who gets the breakthrough, who gets the love. You formed an answer to a fundamental question about yourself. And that answer, forged in pain, became a filter. And through that filter, every new relationship, every new opportunity, every promise you tried to believe in, got processed, unconsciously, automatically, until, predictably, the filter confirmed what the original wound had whispered. The enemy is strategic about this. He doesn't need to attack you from the outside if he can get you to agree with a lie on the inside. Because once you, a designated child of God, internally agree with a false narrative about your own identity, you become the primary gatekeeper of your own delay. Not because you're weak, because you're powerful. And internal agreements, even wrong ones, carry enormous spiritual weight. The cycle ends when the agreement ends, and the agreement ends when you finally see it clearly, name it honestly, and choose, actively, consciously, to align with what God says instead of what the wound concluded. Here is the deepest layer, the one that I think surprises people the most when they finally see it. Because it surprised me. The thing that has been holding you back from fully stepping into what God has for you is not primarily the enemy's assignment. It's not the people who hurt you. It's not the years that feel wasted, or the doors that closed, or the opportunities that slipped away. It is an old identity that has simply become too small for where God is taking you. You have been trying to fit the next chapter of your life into the framework of who you were in the last one. And it will not fit. It was never designed to fit. You cannot pour new wine into an old wineskin. You cannot ask a butterfly to live like it's still in the cocoon. Moses is the most vivid example I can think of. A man called to lead millions of people out of generational bondage, one of the most audacious assignments in human history. But Moses could not have stepped into that calling while he still fundamentally saw himself as a stuttering shepherd hiding in the desert from a failure in his past. That version of himself, the one built by shame and self-doubt and 40 years of obscurity, had to be released, not erased, released. And even standing in front of a burning bush, even with the actual voice of God speaking directly to him, even with a supernatural sign happening right in front of his eyes, Moses argued. He listed every reason he was the wrong choice. Who am I? I can't speak well. You've made a mistake. Choose someone else. And God was not moved, not by one single argument Moses offered, not by his history of failure, not by his self-assessed inadequacies, not by his very reasonable, very human list of limitations. Because God does not choose based on your resume. He chooses based on what he deposited inside you before your resume existed. He looks past the temporary, past the human-defined limitations, past the failures and the false starts and the seasons of hiding, directly to the eternal designation he placed on your spirit before you drew your first breath. Your weaknesses are not evidence against your calling. They are simply the reason the calling requires God, which, if you think about it, was always the design. One more thing before we close, and this one cuts against almost everything the culture around us teaches about strength. Surrender is not weakness. In the kingdom of God, surrender is the most powerful, most liberating, most strategically intelligent move available to you. The world tells you that control is power, that if you let go, you lose. That surrender is just a more spiritual-sounding word for giving up. But that framework misunderstands what surrender actually is in a spiritual context. When you stop white-knuckling the timeline. When you stop trying to manufacture an outcome that God has already orchestrated. When you open your hands, literally, physically, spiritually open them, and say, I trust you with what I cannot control. You are not retreating. You are positioning. You are creating the condition in which God can actually place in your hands what He has been preparing to give you all along. You cannot receive with clenched fists. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego understood this at a level that is almost incomprehensible. 3 men facing a furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal, given the option to bow to an idol or burn alive. And they didn't fight the fire. They didn't plead for a miraculous escape. They didn't ask God to change the circumstances. They walked straight in, with a calm, settled, almost irrational trust that said, even if He doesn't save us, we will not bow. And when the king looked through the opening of that furnace, he didn't see 3 men being consumed. He saw 4 men walking, calmly, freely, in the middle of the fire. And the 4th, he said, looks like the Son of God. They were not delivered from the fire. They were sustained within it, accompanied through it. And when they walked out, not a hair singed, not a thread burned. They didn't even smell like smoke. That is what happens when you stop fighting the furnace and start trusting the one who controls the heat. The fire does not consume what it was never given permission to touch, and your willingness to walk in, not with fear, but with faith, is the invitation for the divine presence to meet you in the very middle of the thing you've been most afraid of. So right now, hand on your heart, I want you to say this, out loud if you can. Not as a wish, not as a desperate request from a place of lack, as a declaration, as someone who is finally, consciously, deliberately choosing to agree with what heaven decided about them before they were born. I release every agreement I made with the lie. I release every false conclusion I drew from real pain. I let go of the identity that was built by rejection, shaped by fear, and reinforced by the opinions of people who never had access to what God placed inside me. I am designated. I am set apart. I am being finished, not forgotten, not delayed without purpose, not abandoned. I walk into the furnace of my current season without terror, because I am not walking in alone. I break every repeating cycle, not by fighting the surface, but by severing agreement with its root. I step forward today as the person God saw when He first spoke my name into existence. Before any failure touched me, before any wound defined me, before any lie convinced me to make myself smaller. My confusion is lifting. My isolation was architecture. My suffering was tuition, paying for lessons that could not have been learned in comfort. My breakthrough is not coming eventually. It is already here, activated in this moment of agreement. And I will never again apologize for the full, unfiltered, unapologetic expression of who God made me to be. If this confirmed something that your spirit already knew, something that's been trying to surface for a while, share it with one person today. Not because the algorithm needs it, because someone in your life is sitting under their own broom tree right now, convinced they're alone. And this might be exactly what they needed to hear. And drop a comment below. Tell me what opened up in you while you were watching. Tell me what hit differently. Tell me what you're walking out of, or walking into. I read every single one, not as a routine, because your story matters. Because this community is full of people walking the exact same road you're on, carrying weight that looks invisible from the outside. You were never supposed to carry it alone, and you never were.